Home service companies. You need to know these two things when bidding, otherwise, your business could fail very soon. Let's get into it. So, what are the two things that you need to consider when you're bidding a job? Well, have you ever heard of cost of goods sold or COGS? You have to know what your expenses are because that's basically what it is. When you're a service company, you have to understand what costs or expenses are going to be directly related to delivering that service. So, let me give you some examples. If you're a painting company, you're going to have some direct labor related to completing that job, your employees, and you even have to consider yourself in that expense. If you are doing some of the work yourself, you got to get paid, right? So you have to include yourself. So direct labor costs. Now, a lot of times we forget to include workers' compensation or payroll taxes and other costs related to that job, such as travel expenses. You have to include that expense for bidding the job right. Because if you don't, then you're already climbing uphill and going to be receiving a lower profit. So understanding your cost of goods, we'll get into that. The second is know where you want your profit to be. As simple as that sounds, it sometimes is overlooked. Are you going to be happy with just profiting $500, $200 on a job that might take you 2 or 3 days? Probably the answer is no, but you also need to figure out what percentage of the gross profit is something that you're going to be, happy with, or of the gross sales, which is basically your gross profit. So, for example, $10,000. If you are going to be at 30% gross profit, then that means you made $3,000 on that job. So let's kind of break that down. Let's get into it a little bit. And I also want to mention that for service-based companies or home service-based companies, typically, right, whether you're a painter, concrete, some other type of service-based, HVAC, you name it. Generally speaking, you want to be around 30 to 50% on the high side of gross profit, meaning that you're making 30 to 50% of the sale after your expenses or cost of goods. So let me give you some examples, okay? So let's get into it. What are cost of goods? If you have a job that is, let's say you have 4 employees that are going to take 4 days to complete this job, okay? I've already done the math here, so bear with me. If you have $40 a labor for each labor hour, okay, so that's 4 employees at $40 an hour. That's $160 in labor per hour that you have on that job. And if you do the math on if it's going to take 4 days to do that job, 8 hours a day, it roughly comes out to $5,100 something dollars. So let's just call it $5,000. 4 employees, $48 an hour, 8 hours a day. If that job is done in 4 days, that is about $5,000 in labor. Okay. Now let's just assume in all that includes payroll taxes that the employer would pay for, and also workers' compensation insurance and any other direct related expenses such as travel expense, gas to get that job done. Okay. You guys with me? So just let's go with this scenario here. Now, let's say that you have a job that is going to be about $3,000 in material. Okay. That's the other component of cost of goods for this service. So if you're a painter or whatever, let's just use painting as an example. It's easier to do. If you have a job and you know that it's going to be around $3,000 in paint and other materials, such as you have to include consumables or throwaways, right? Which is roller covers, maybe buckets, things of that nature. You need to include in that. And if you're not sure, then good rule of thumb, maybe you add 10 to 20% of the hard material costs, and that would help you bid that. So let's just assume you have $3,000 in material costs for this job. Remember, we had $5,000 in labor, and now we have $3,000 in material. That's about $8,000 in total costs for delivering that service. Now, we said earlier that you have to be close to, or in your industry, typically 30 to 50% of your gross margin to be somewhat in industry standards. Now, it's going to vary on your market. It's going to vary on competition. It's going to vary on, what niche you're in as well. So if you're in a niche that is very non-competitive, meaning that there's only a few people that are in your market that are doing that, you might be able to charge more and be on the higher side. But let's back into it a little bit, okay? So once again, we're getting back to where do we need to bid and how do we figure out what to bid? Well, we talked about you got to understand your COGS and you need to understand what is going to really make you happy on earning what to earn each day that you're at a job. If you are, let's say, happy with $1,000 of gross profit a day, then for a 4-day job, that would be $4,000 in gross profit. So let's use that scenario as an example. $8,000 is your hard cost of good costs. And if you want to make $4,000 a day and you know it's going to take you 4 days, then you got to be at $12,000 to bid for that job. So $12,000 is your bid for that job. Assuming all goes well, you're going to be able to keep your costs for that job at 8,000 and you're going to profit the 4,000. That's one way to look at it. And 4,000 for that job, if you do the math, 4,000 into 12,000 is roughly 33% gross profits. You're on the lower side of the 30 to 50% gross profit, but still acceptable. And would you be happy with that? Would you be happy with making $1,000 a day for every single job that you have? Okay, you do the math on that. That's over $250,000 in gross profit for business if you annualize that. If you were to be at, let's say, 40% on that same job of gross profit, then you would need to be, closer to $13,000 in that bid. So it's not a one size fits all, certainly not. But what helps is understanding what your costs are and where you want to be as a business owner or entrepreneur to be happy with the income and obviously money that can go back into the business to keep it running. And other factors obviously play a big role with that, but I want to hit home and make sure you understand if you don't know what your costs are, then it's going to be very hard for you to bid. If you know what your costs are and you know where you want your profit to be, then that's going to help you get you to that bidding ultimate that bid number, that actual charge for that client. Another way to think about this is that if you're doing some very repetitive work or hey, most of the homes in your area are very, let's just say, cookie cutter, for lack of a better term, you could back into it a different way. And you could also look at it as price per square foot if it's very simple. So for example, if you were to do a job for a house that's 2,000 square feet and you are, let's take the scenario where we bid it at $13,000. Okay, that's 6.5 square feet per square feet charge. So if you end up doing the calculations, let's say you end up doing 10 jobs and all the houses are very similar, you can back into it and figure out where you're typically charging, and you can use that as a baseline. So for example, you can go into a house without spending a whole lot of time and see if it's pretty basic that you're going to be at $6.50 a square foot, and then you can come up with the price. Now, if there's more doors than normal, more windows, or whatever your service is, if you know there's more custom work, then you could build on to that. But at least you have a baseline and a starting point so that you know where to bid. So you can back into it that way. So if you're ever not sure in your head, you can, based off your experience, understand how long a job will take, know how long or how many employees it will take to complete that job, and then you can back into it that way. The other way is to, once again, go price per square foot and then add on additional, details and charge more for those things. Custom woodwork, you have to do more sanding, more caulking, you name it, right? So those are the things that you need to consider. So let's get back to it. If you don't know what your costs are, and if you don't know where you need your profit to be, then you're never going to bid it right because you're just going to be throwing and spitballing numbers. So if you back into it that way, you always know where your profit needs to be and what your costs are, then you know what you can charge. So ultimately, that's the way I go about it. Most of you might know that I've been into the decorative concrete field for a long time. And a lot of times I start with a price per square foot, and then I can confirm with my foreman how many days we think this is going to take. And then from there, I can feel good and adjust my number based upon the detail or scope of that job. So that's the way I go about it. It's worked very well. And if you're in a custom niche type of service, you generally can be, closer to that 50% gross margin. So if you know your costs are, let's say, $5,000, you can be closer to that $10,000 range. If you know that it's going to be, more of a custom type of job, right? Then you can even add on to it from there. But ultimately, if you don't know what your costs are, if you don't know what's going to make you and the business keep running and being successful to put money back into the business and put money in your pocket, then ultimately you're just setting yourself up to fail, and you're going to probably bid jobs incorrectly. So don't let that happen, and ensure that you have a good framework in place to know that you can put everything down, back check yourself to ensure that you're delivering on that you're putting together a bid that makes sense for you and your company. I hope this is helpful. If you like what the content is about, make sure you hit that like button. If there's a topic you'd like for me to touch on, then make sure you let me know, and I'll make sure we can put a video out there on it. So anyway, thanks for watching. Talk to you next time.